जी। ऑलराइट आप
The factory system is up and running. First in Britain, and then the United States, and Belgium, and Germany, and eventually onto Russia and even Japan. We've concentrated production into a single location, the factory, and specialized the labor so that one person can do a simple task over and over and over. Today, we tackle the tech that made the Industrial Revolution revolutionary. There's a ton of new technology in this period. It's kind of the whole point. Let's go to the map. I tried to map all of the major technological advancements in the Industrial Revolution. You can see that since the whole thing started in Great Britain, I had to blow up Great Britain to a larger size so that you could see all of the advancements that took place there. Notice these are mostly the early stuff, what we call the first Industrial Revolution. But as the revolution spread, so did the innovation, and the United States took the lead. Don't get lost in all of the innovations on this magnificently designed map. The College Board breaks it down into 3 chunks here. First, power. The first industrial revolution is going to be powered by coal and James Watt's steam engine. Towards the end of this period, the internal combustion engine came to prominence, fueled by oil and gasoline. The College Board calls this the fossil fuels revolution. This is when humans turned to coal and oil to fuel their new machines. Second, the second industrial revolution. Let's head back to the map. The first industrial revolution was all about steam engines powering textile machines. There's other stuff like farming equipment as well, but that's the main idea of the first industrial revolution: steam and textiles. Now look at the timeline at the bottom. Around 1870, the second industrial revolution began. These inventions are more modern and propel humanity into the contemporary period. This is stuff like steel and chemicals, electricity, and precision machinery. If the first industrial revolution is steam and iron, the second industrial revolution is oil and steel. Third, the earth shrinks. Not literally. The College Board wants you to know that the tech of the Industrial Revolution, like the stuff on the map here, vastly accelerated the movement of people and communication. Things like railroads, steamships, the telegraph, the radio. We all got a little closer to one another thanks to the Industrial Revolution. So there's a million technological innovations that you could talk about during the Industrial Revolution. But you need to focus on the 3 big tech ideas. 1, power from the steam engine and the internal combustion engine. 2, the continued advancement of the Industrial Revolution through the end of this era in what is known as the Second Industrial Revolution. And 3, the improvements to transportation and communication. Okay, but how did governments in countries where they weren't doing industrial things kind of implement industrial things? See you tomorrow.
Your child needs these 3 key factors to get into an Ivy League or top 25 university. And it's not having a good GPA.
Remember a few days ago when I was like, or 3, your government can make you copy Britain and force industrialization from above. Well, there's a whole section in Unit 5 about that. Today, we review the government's role in industrialization. Calm down, Britain. You started the Industrial Revolution, we get it. And some places copied this idea and started their own industrial revolutions. Most notably, the United States. But some governments around the world saw that this was happening in other places and not in their own country and decided to implement their own state-sponsored visions of industrialization. There are a ton of examples your teacher could have used here, and the College Board only lists one illustrative example, and that's Egypt. But I'm going to go a step further and talk about 4. This way you should have a pretty good idea as to what's meant by the government's role in industrialization. First is that illustrative example they give, Muhammad Ali in Egypt. Not that Muhammad Ali, it's a relatively common name. Ali was a pasha and the de facto ruler of Egypt within the Ottoman Empire. The College Board specifically mentions his modernizations of the cotton industry, so let's just focus on that. He nationalized all the iltizams. Iltizams? Iltizams? What's an iltizam again? Tax farming. Oh, right. Tax farming. Now he had control of all the agricultural land. He made everyone sell their crop to the state, where he would then sell the crops off to the ever-emerging textile market during the Industrial Revolution. He even expanded the amount of arable land by implementing vast improvements to the pre-existing irrigation systems all around Egypt. See? A government stepped in, took control of industrialization. There are a ton of examples your teacher could have used here, and the College Board only lists one illustrative example, and that's Egypt. But I'm going to go a step further and talk about 4. This way you should have a pretty good idea as to what's meant by the government's role in industrialization. First is that illustrative example they give, Muhammad Ali in Egypt. Not that Muhammad Ali, it's a relatively common name. Ali was a pasha. and the de facto ruler of Egypt within the Ottoman Empire. The College Board specifically mentions his modernizations of the cotton industry, so let's just focus on that. He nationalized all the iltizams. Iltizams? Iltizams? What's an iltizam again? Tax farming. Oh, right. Tax farming. Now he had control of all the agricultural land. He made everyone sell their crop to the state, where he would then sell the crops off to the ever-emerging textile market during the Industrial Revolution. He even expanded the amount of arable land by implementing vast improvements to the pre-existing irrigation systems all around Egypt. See? A government stepped in, took control of the economy, and implemented their own state vision of industrialization. Second, Tsar Nicholas in Russia. So the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, is not exactly at the forefront of this trend. And thinking of Russia as an industrialized state is really a 20th century thing. But after they freed the serfs in 1861, they had 23 million new people enter the labor market. They started building factories and even built the largest railroad on Earth, the Trans-Siberian Railroad. So the Russian government and their state-sponsored vision of industrialization stepped in and started to economically reform really in the 1890s. But political reforms in Russia won't come until well after 1900. Third, the self-strengthening movement in China. This is another late reform movement starting in the 1860s. Why does China need to reform? We'll get way more into this in Unit 6, but they lose a series of conflicts to the West and even have to have help from the British and French and other people to help put down the largest rebellion in the history of the planet, the Taiping Rebellion. So China was falling behind, and the Qing dynasty noticed it. The Qing government stepped in and modernized the military, the industry, agriculture, and textile production. China wanted to bring in the modern ideas of the West without bringing in the social and political ideas of the West. They were afraid that if they brought in those ideas, that could bring down the empire. So they never fully embraced modernization. How can I tell they never fully embraced modernization? Because they lost a war at the end of this period. To Japan. That's right, Japan. How did Japan get so powerful by 1895? Fourth, the Meiji Restoration. After the arrival of modern steamships from America in the 1850s with a letter from President Millard Fillmore to open trade with the United States, Japan started the process that comes to be known as the Meiji Restoration. Japan had seen what the West had done to China in the Opium Wars, and they heard from the Dutch at Tsushima what was going on with the Industrial Revolution, and finally saw it firsthand when the American black ships steamed into Edo Bay. So after some internal conflict, Japan dumped the Tokugawa shogunate and restored power back to the emperor. The emperor's name? Meiji. Meiji Restoration. They sent people all around the globe and came back and implemented full-scale modernization. Did it work? Ask China or Korea or Taiwan or and implemented their own state vision of industrialization. Second, Tsar Nicholas in Russia. So the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, is not exactly at the forefront of this trend. And thinking of Russia as an industrialized state is really a 20th century thing. But after they freed the serfs in 1861, they had 23 million new people enter the labor market. They started building factories.
Building your online business? Go to Wix.com and set up your store on a single integrated platform.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to lay to rest the theory of mercantilism. It certainly served its purpose in Unit 4. It turns out, though, that less restrictions on the economy leads to greater advancements. Nowadays, the kids are all talking about laissez-faire policies and free markets. And if we have to charge someone with mercantilism's death, I would definitely blame Adam Smith. This Scotsman's 1776 book on the wealth of nations murdered mercantilism. So, with mercantilism dead and capitalism in full swing in the modern period, today we review the economic developments and innovations of the industrial era. Those old mercantilist government restrictions buried 6 feet under by Adam Smith, these new free markets will drastically change the way the economy works. It's no longer Spanish silver versus British textiles. Nah, it's now Unilever's palm oil versus the United Fruit Company's bananas. With all of those economic regulations gone, transnational businesses will emerge as the new economic powerhouses. And they're going to dominate global trade for the rest of the course. Transnational businesses are businesses that exist across national boundaries. Now, the College Board only mentions 2, but I found 14. Let's go to the map. These are all transnational companies that were LLC called Freemanpedia.com. Legit domain name. Check the domain name of a simple public servant like myself. So I checked the owner of the domain name. And you know who owned Freemanpedia.com? First, do you know what nemesis means? A righteous infliction of retribution manifested by an appropriate agent. Persona national business. The Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. It's currently the largest bank in Europe with over $2 trillion in assets. HSBC is a British bank that was originally so that one day they could take down a simple startup from a teacher in Virginia. And the College Board mentions them as an illustrative example and to College Board. So when you join the millions of people who visit freemanpedia.com every year, and you see that little dash in the domain name and in the logo, that's no dash, my friend. That's a protest. When I see that dash, I see the little guy standing up to the transnational business. Available to more people? Yes. So
it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And you know who said that?
some people are just never happy. You give them a sweet job doing a repetitive task over and over for 6 days a week for a couple cents an hour in disgusting working conditions for like 16 hours a day. I mean, you even give their whole family a job, like their wives and their daughters and their sons. And how do they react? Today, we review the reactions to the industrial economy. Of course I was being facetious. The job is terrible, the pay is terrible, the conditions are terrible, the hours are terrible. The whole situation is less than ideal. But the whole point of capitalism is that the government doesn't get involved. It's a free market, not a regulated market. But what Adam Smith calls the invisible hand can't solve all of society's ills. So, as a huge chunk of the planet is seeing an overall increase in their standard of living, there were some definite problems in this new economy, and the College Board breaks it down for you in section 5.8. In fact, the College Board breaks it down into 4 types of reactions. I wish someone would make a map where you could see all of these reactions in one place at one time. So, the big 4 kind of jump out at you here. First, government reform movements like the Sadler Report in Great Britain. Second, labor unions. There's a ton of these, so I just put some of the big ones on there so you can kind of see or kind of jump out at you his reactions in one place at one time. So the big 4 kind of jump out at you here. First, government reform movements like the Sadler Report in Great Britain. Second, labor unions. There's a ton of these, so I just put some of the big ones on there so you can kind of see them where they are. Full disclosure, I'm in the NEA, the National Educators Association. It's a union for teachers that's supposed to get better pay and conditions and hours and that kind of stuff. Third, Marxism. You've seen the impact capitalism has had on the economy. Well, Marxism will clash head-on with capitalism late into the contemporary period. Fourth, government modernizations. So we already talked about the self-strengthening movement, so today let's focus on the reorganizations. So we are on with capitalism late into the contemporary period. Fourth, government modernizations. So we already talked about the self-strengthening movement, so today let's focus on the reorganization of the Ottoman Empire under the Tanzimat reforms. First up, reform movements. If you're like my students, and let's face it, you're not, there's no way they're still paying attention at this point. We've been at this for what? Like a month? They're normally fed up with my shtick after about 3 minutes. Dude, we get it, you have a website. But if they are still here, they'll certainly remember my shtick. They're still paying attention at this point. We've been at this for what? Like a month? They're normally fed up with my shtick after about 3 minutes. Dude, we get it, you have a website. But if they are still here, they'll certainly remember one of the reform movements we talked about in class. In class, we read through the Sadler Report. Sadler was a British member of Parliament who, in 1832, went around and interviewed as many current and former child laborers as he could. The result is heartbreaking. They go into depressing detail about their miserable industrial childhoods. Pay, conditions, treatment. The British were the first to industrialize and became the first to have the government step in and pass laws to limit the ills of the new industrial world. Later on, other industrialized nations will follow with child labor laws, minimum wages, limiting hours. But far too often, these conditions continue to this day. Don't believe me? Google where your shoes were made. Second, labor.
Your child needs these 3 key factors to get into an Ivy League or top 25.
Oh my God, does this unit ever end? Answer, yes, today. Now you know all of these industrial changes don't just affect economics. All of society is affected. I'm talking about whole new classes of people, new roles for middle class and working class women, and social challenges like pollution and poverty and crime and disease, public housing, infrastructure. So today, let's review society in the industrial age. All right, so we've been talking about the Industrial Revolution for like a week now. But today let's focus on what happens to society as a result of all this industrialization. Society is a big category here in AP World History. We use it a lot. But don't let it be one of those words you don't know. It just means the people. How does all of this affect people or different groups of people? And the Industrial Revolution definitely affected the people. The College Board breaks it down into 3 big sections, so let's go. First section, new social classes. Remember the French Revolution? The College Board doesn't because they erased it from the curriculum. Sacre bleu. But that revolution highlighted the disparity between the social classes left over from the medieval era. I'm talking about the three estates. The first estate, clergy. The second estate, nobility. And the third estate, the next big social change the College Board wants you to know about is women and children. The big change for working class women in this period is the shakeup of home life. Instead of most of your family working on a farm growing crops to live on, the men, the women, and the children are now all working in the factory. And that's a huge change from the last every period in history until this point. But the College Board doesn't bring that up. Challenge stemming from the Industrial Revolution are all the social challenges. It's kind of a long list from the College Board here, but these are all the negatives that your teacher went over and over with you as housing shortages and the overall lack of infrastructure and
Your child needs these three key factors to get into an Ivy League or top 25.
Over on freemanpedia.com, I made a list of the people to know for AP World Modern. It has everyone explicitly or implicitly listed by the College Board for this course. And if you break it down by period, it looks like this. The post-classical period has 19 people. The early modern period has 43 people. The modern period, this period, has 56 people. So I need to choose from roughly 56 people to find the MVP for this unit. And I can't just say George Washington because America. By the way, the final unit has 75 people. Yeah, get ready. But the modern period, 1750 to 1900, is just not that big a deal without the MVP for Unit 5. Today, we review the MVP of the modern period, James Watt. I know. There's so many more cooler people in Unit 5 than James Watt. Save your letters and petitions. Bolivar is cool. Bismarck is cool. Jose Rizal is cool. Toussaint is cool. I get it. But we here at Freemanpedia are all about value. All those revolutionaries are badass, obviously. But they were just following through with the ideas of some coffee-obsessed French philosophers. There's a stat in baseball called VORP. It's an acronym for value over replacement player. And without getting too inside baseball, it means what would happen if this player was replaced with an average player. Remove the steam engine from the Industrial Revolution, and that's it. There is no Industrial Revolution. Your history class would be all about flying shuttles and spinning jennies. Forget that. Your history class wouldn't even exist because you'd be out farming right now. Now, I'm not 100% sure that your teacher covered James Watt in class, but he's the guy who perfected the steam engine. And I would even argue that there are more important people in this period than James Watt. But this is an AP World Modern review, and no topics get more subsections in the curriculum than the Industrial Revolution. Go back and rewatch all the videos from this week and the ads that accompany them. None of that exists without Scotsman James Watt taking the Newcomen steam engine, an inefficient steam engine, and making it super efficient. Without getting too technical, the Newcomen steam engine, the old steam engine, used steam to push a piston up and then allowed condensation and gravity allow for it to fall back down. And the whole process repeats. Now this is fine for pumping water out of a mine, but not much else. Enter the MVP, James Watt. His steam engine used a separate condenser and split the steam to push the piston up and then push it back down. So the old Newcomen steam engine goes up and then just kind of falls back down, but Watt's steam engine goes up and down, up and down, up and down. So the old steam engine, the Newcomen steam engine, produced about 15,000 watts of energy. James Watt's new steam engine produces about 150,000 watts of energy. That's a 10 times increase in energy output, and it used 75% less fuel. See what I did back there? Watt's steam engine produced 150,000 watts. Back in 1882, the unit for measuring 1 joule per second of power was named in James Watt's honor. And what was this new steam engine used for? Everything. So that's my MVP of Unit 5, James Watt. Without his steam engine, the Industrial Revolution is just a blip on the radar with nothing to power it. All right, 5 units down, 4 to go. So we spent over a week on industrialization. But what were the consequences of all?
Let's say I'm a biology student working on a research paper for school. As I work, I incorporate
Unit 6, let's go. Now I think it's only fair that I warn you here. Y'all are about to see some racism. And not like, oh my god, that's racist. But like systematic racism.
Shut up.
That is the predominant thought at the time. Like commonly accepted, steadfast, racist ideas that permeated the globe. You think the world's racist now? Let me introduce you to a little century known as the 19th century. So you've been warned. Today we review the rationales for imperialism. Rationale? That's a polite word, College Board. Like going up to a murderous bank robber and being like, what was your rationale for this crime spree? Anyways, the West. That's another one of those words. The West, aka the Western world, or Western civilization, unfortunately for you, is not just the west side of the map. But if you follow this little formula, you can find out what the West means. First, take a little Greco-Roman heritage, and then mix in some Christianity. Then add in the ideas of reason from the scientific revolution and Enlightenment. Finally, sprinkle on top some Industrial Revolution, and you got yourself the West. Visually, it looks like this. Basically, it's the US, Canada, Western Europe, and Australia. Be careful here, there's a bunch of different variations on this, but this is kind of the general consensus. And Unit 6 is all about the West, using their new industrial might to take new territory. And today's about the rationale, or reasons, why the West does what the West does. So I'm going to break these rationales down into a couple categories. First, the economic rationale. Now y'all are about to hear a lot of excuses as to why this happened. This is the real reason. The economic reason is the real one. Economically, the West is now either industrializing or industrialized. What do factories need? Raw materials. What else do factories need? Markets to sell their product. In class, I always call it M&Ms here. Markets and materials. Second, the religious rationale. Remember that one ingredient of the West, that little formula we just did? One of those was Christianity. Well, these Christians are using the rationale of converting people to Christianity and ending the remnants of the slave trade. In my class, we went over the story of British missionary David Livingstone getting lost in Africa. 3, remember that race? Racist warning I gave you at the beginning, it's about to pay off here. I call this category the what had happened was category. When someone starts an excuse with what had happened was, you know some craziness is about to come out. These are straight up excuses. The first what had happened was is based on what they used to call science. And to be fair, this was breaking cutting edge science at the time. You're all familiar with Darwinism and survival of the fittest, right? You graduated 3rd grade science. Well, the Western imperialists took that to a whole new level. They looked at your non-Western culture like a scientist would look at the dodo bird. Remember this guy? A 3-foot-tall, flightless bird. Since it had no natural predators on the islands it lived on, it would just lay its eggs on the ground. No predators, no problem. But within 75 years of coming into contact with humans, the dodo bird was extinct. It couldn't survive. It was not the fittest. Well, to the West, that's your non-Western culture. India, your culture is the dodo. It will die out. China, your culture is the dodo. It will die out. You can't compete with the superior cultures of the West. Therefore, your culture will die out. Oh my God, it's hard to say this stuff out loud. They called this social Darwinism and said that Western cultures would survive because they were fit and other cultures would not because they weren't, just like the dodo. See? Super racist. But there's one more what had happened was excuse, and this one is arguably the worst. The final rationale is something called white man's burden. The name comes from this Rudyard Kipling poem of the same name. The premise is simple. The West is here not because they want to take all your raw materials and secure markets for their industrialized economies. No, they're here to help. It's the West's duty, their burden to carry. They must civilize the world. We've seen how backwards all of the cultures out.
As I'm in the midst of applying for residency right now, wish me luck, Grammarly has again been a lifesaver with my application.
Enough with all the excuses. You know the West is on the move. It's out conquering and taking over all these other places. But where exactly are they going? Today, we review state expansion in Unit 6. If Unit 6 was a sentence, 6.2 would be the action verb. State expansion is literally what imperialism was. Now, there's a ton of different examples, and your teacher could have gone over any number of them during the year. So I'm not going to go empire to empire and colony to colony. Instead, let's review some of the main ideas as to how this went down. First, winners and losers. Let's start with the losers. And by losers here, I mean empires that actually declined in this period. The College Board mentions 2, Spain and Portugal. Now, Spain is probably the biggest loser in this period after losing most of their American empire to Bolivar and the boys. But also they lost what was left of their empire to the United States at the very end of this period in 1898 in the Spanish-American War. That's Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. They broke the 3rd rule of warfare. Never go in against the United States when colonies are on the line. The other loser, Portugal, will lose the rule of warfare. Never go in against the United States when colonies are on the line. The other loser, Portugal, will lose the biggest chunk of its empire, Brazil, to independence, but they'll still hold on to Angola and Mozambique in southern Africa. Enough of the losers. The winners in this period will be the rest of the West and Japan. Empires like the US and Britain and France and Germany and Japan will all grow behind the might of their industrial economies, and Britain this period will be the rest of the West and Japan. Empires like the US and Britain and France and Germany and Japan will all grow behind the might of their industrial economies and militaries. Next, methods. The College Board wants you to know it wasn't all just straight up conquering. These new empires will use both warfare and diplomacy to get their way. A prime warfare example is the Opium Wars in China. Britain got more ports opened, Hong Kong, more freedoms, and the ability to legally sell opium in China. Now, diplomacy just means negotiating. So the best example in this period of diplomacy is, you may think New Zealand is just a place where The Lord of the Rings or Flight of the Conchords or Taika Waititi come from, but it's also a prime example of a settler colony.
As I'm in the midst of applying for residency right now, wish me luck, Grammarly has again been a lifesaver with my application.
Ooh, look at that. It's halftime. We've been on this countdown now for 40 days, with 40 more to go. Honestly, I did not. Well, in amazing sports films, like Disney's Safety, they usually have some sort of big motivating speech or halftime speech to really turn things around for the protagonist. Well, and would you look at us? It's halftime here too. So, I've accumulated some of the greatest minds in the AP World History universe, and they've sent me some personal messages to you to get you motivated for the second half. This is your halftime speech. Take it away, guys.
Hello, my name is Kelly Rosati, and I had the privilege of working with Ben Freeman years ago, back when his beard was a 5 o'clock shadow. I would say my best advice is to think like Descartes. It is important to doubt as far as possible all things. So whenever you are looking at any excerpt given to you by College Board, whether that be on the stimulus-based multiple choice questions, or as part of a prompt for a short answer question, or as documents in the DBQ.
How did everyone suddenly get so good at writing? WordTune. It's your writing wingman. WordTune can make you...
I love a good rebellion. Most of the good Star Wars films are about a plucky rebellion rising up to take down an evil empire. Well, 6.3 is all about the resistance. Over the past week, we've been talking about how the West has risen up to be this unstoppable industrial powerhouse. But today, the people strike back. Let's review the indigenous responses to imperialism. I kind of just set this up like a classic underdog story, where the little guy finally rises up and takes down the evil empire. But today is more Rogue One than Return of the Jedi. And 5 of the 6 largest empires of all time reach their peak in this period. And that does not bode well for the indigenous people within those empires. And we went over all the reasons why the West was so dominant last week. In this section, the College Board gives you 11 illustrative examples covering 3 different topics. Those are 11 different examples that could illustrate how the indigenous people responded to the arrival of the West. But this is a review show. I'm not going over 11 topics. So I'll make it easy. Let's review 3 examples. 1 for each category from our good friends at the College Board. But before we get going, I want you to remember a little poem. Now, I say this in class over and over throughout this unit. And no matter how much you want these underdog stories to work out, they just won't. And you can look back to Unit 5 as to why the West was so powerful. Or you can remember this one line from a poem by author Hilaire Belloc. Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. The Maxim gun was a machine gun invented in 1884 by American inventor Hiram Maxim. While this wasn't the only reason the West dominated, it certainly didn't hurt. So think of the Maxim gun as a symbol for all the industrial and technological advantages the West brings with them. In fact, this should be your mantra in 6.3. Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not. Whatever happens, the West is going to dominate. First example, direct resistance. My favorite example here is the War of the Golden Stool in 1900. This example has everything. British imperialism in Africa, British white man's burden, British social Darwinism, a golden stool. The Ashanti Kingdom existed on the edge of the British colony of the Gold Coast in modern Kingdom. The Zulu are notorious warriors in South Africa. They had a similar reputation for being fierce fighters as the Apache do in the Americas. The kingdom was founded by this man, Shaka Zulu. And these guys fought off the Dutch and the British for years. In fact, the Zulu kingdom's most famous victory was over the British at the Battle of Isandlwana in southern Africa and the Xhosa cattle killing rebellion. And of course, if you need to see them all in one, all of the modern period, both from Unit 5 and from Unit 6.
As I'm in the midst of applying for residency right now, wish me luck, Grammarly has again been a lifesaver with my application.
Okay, so the West is super advanced and they're coming to a continent near you. But what exactly are they after? God, gold, and glory is dead. A few days ago, I called this new driving factor M&Ms. Raw materials to go into their factories and markets to sell the goods that come out of the factories. So what raw materials are they after? Today we review the global and markets to sell the goods that come out of the factories. So what raw materials are they after? Today we review economic development. Charles Goodyear figured out the formula to vulcanize rubber. Rubber tires would melt in hot conditions and become useless. Want to make some vulcanized rubber at home? Try adding sulfur to the gum from a rubber plant. The rubber will maintain its dexterity without melting or becoming sticky. Goodyear patented the idea but died before making any major wealth off of it. And don't think this is just tires for cars. A lot of this is for wiring. Think of all the telegraph wires and electrical wires that are being put up all over as places modernize. A few years later, the federal law that if you find an island with guano on it that's unclaimed, we can have it. It's American. It's the law. There's no way that led to actual expansion, right? Wrong. These islands and these islands were all taken into the American empire due to this law. So when you think of global economic development, think of the M&Ms driving the West to go out and search for these raw materials. But before we go, we should address the idea.
Your child needs these three key factors to get into an Ivy League or top 25.
The last two sections of Unit 6 are all about migrations. I don't know you, but there's a good chance that your people got to where they are now during this time period. Let's check my 23andMe to see where I came from. Not gonna lie, not super surprised. Here. But of the answers, let's check my 23andMe to see where I came from. Not gonna lie, not super surprised here. But of the ancestors I can actually trace, some of them have been here for longer than I can research, but others of them arrived in this period. They migrated to the United States. Today we review the global migrations of the modern period. So many people are moving around the planet that it forever changed the makeup of multiple locations around the globe. By the way, if this migration stuff fascinates you, take AP Human Geography. It's basically all they talk about. But for today's review, let's focus on a simple set of terms: push factors and pull factors. These are just ways of describing why people are migrating. By the way, don't say travel or visit or went. Use your words, kids. Say migrate. Words have meaning. When you migrate, you are going there to stay. You are not coming right back. So people are migrating, but why? Some pushed out. Think of bad things happening back home, like the potato famine or the Taiping Rebellion. Some are pulled into a country. Think of job opportunities or large urban centers. So push factors push you out, and pull factors pull you in. Here's a map. You can see there's a ton of people migrating to a ton of places. I'm not sure which ones your teacher went over, but there's a few easy ones to remember. First, the Irish migration to the United States. Due to the potato famine, 1 million Irish died and another 1 million were pushed to the United States. Overall, the population in Ireland fell by 25%. Second, Chinese immigration to the United States. The Chinese called wouldn't even call their jobs either in mining or railroad building. Now, I know I just told you that migrations means you don't come back, but there are migrant laborers as well. Think of them as people who migrate for certain parts of the year before returning home for other parts of the year. A huge chunk of the American agricultural industry is farmed by migrant laborers. But the best example here are Italian industrial workers who were pushed out by warfare and pulled in by job opportunities in Argentina. When Argentina got its current concept,
As I'm in the midst of applying for residency right now, wish me luck, Grammarly has again been a lifesaver with my application and helping me write my
I don't know if you remember, but we started Unit 6 with a warning. Y'all are about to see some racism. And wasn't the whole last unit just gross? Historically, Unit 6 is fascinating and interesting and everything, but I hate it. It's the worst. There's all this nastiness and racism and suffering and exploitation, and there's no payoff. There's never like, and this bad guy was stopped from doing all these horrible things. It's just gross, so I had to pick an MVP who would encapsulate all the grossness of Unit 6. Today we review the MVP of Unit 6, King Leopold II, of Belgium. No one epitomizes the greed and nastiness of Unit 6 more than King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold ruled Belgium for exactly 44 years. From December 17th, 1865, Belgium, not the Belgian Trading Company, but Leopold himself took personal control of the Congo by promising to improve the lives of the people there. I hate this guy so much. He then proceeded to use the Congo as his own personal rubber plantation. If the Congolese did not meet their rubber quota, or if they were caught harvesting the rubber in a non-sustainable manner, he would have their hands cut off. There's a ton of pictures of this stuff online, as this was highly chronicled by a few missionaries in the Congo. You can look at them if you want, but I want to show you one photo that had the most impact. The man pictured here is Nasala. His wife and daughter were killed and mutilated by Leopold's men. He brought his dead 5-year-old daughter's hand and foot to the local mission where he knew a photographer lived. Alice Seeley Harris took this photo in 1904, and then hundreds more. And she wasn't the only one working to end these atrocities. 5 years earlier, Joseph Conrad wrote his famous novel, The Heart of Darkness, where he recounts his journey up the Congo River. It was an early account of the horrors of colonialism in the Congo. And some 19th century celebrities even got involved. 19th century authors like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of
Students who didn't even want to talk, all of a sudden now are talking. They are contributing because there was a equality.
The last period, let's go. The contemporary period, 1900 to present. We were born in this period, albeit in different millennia, but still. And that means a new unit. Unit 7, Global Conflicts. Calm down, I know, it's both world wars in this unit. Some of you only care about world wars. And I get it, they're historically amazing in every way a historian might be amazed. But as much as history nerds love the world wars, the College Board does not. So don't think you're about to get into some hours-long deep dive into Archduke Franz Ferdinand or Winston Churchill or Sergeant Stubby. If you love this stuff, major in history. Or even better, become a history teacher. But this is a review series for the AP we're about to go through. Through some major shifts. And the 4 we're going over today are not illustrative examples. The College Board didn't list these in a way that these might help you understand a larger concept. These are 4 that they require. So let's review the 4 shifters. First shifter, Mexico. Warning, this one lasts about a decade. It has a ton of twists and turns, so here's a quick review. Mexico was ruled by a dictator. Porfirio Diaz took power in a coup back in 1876. He then ruled for the next 31 years. In 1910, he promised to step aside, and then didn't. Then, he arrested his #1 rival in the election and declared himself the winner. Diaz is basically Mexican Putin. But that rival, a wealthy landowner named Francisco Madero, escaped prison and fled to the United States. He returned and led a fight that threw out the false 1910 election and saw Madero become president. The next decade is full of infighting that saw the assassination of Madero and his vice president, as well as the popular peasant revolts under groups form into one league, the Chinese United League. They had a long list of demands, but it's basically expel the Manchu, establish a republic, and distribute the land to the people. This was all under the leadership of Sun Yat-sen. This one's tough too. Remember all the czars? Wasn't that fun? But it turns out during these shifty times, no czar was more vulnerable to a shift than Tsar Nicholas II. The Romanovs had ruled for 300 years up to this point, and this czar is a nightmare. He launched multiple anti-Semitic pogroms against Russian Jews. It's one of those words, right? Pogrom. Pogrom is an organized riot aimed at a group of people. In this case, the Jews of Russia. In fact, he was publicly scolded by US President Teddy Roosevelt. Roosevelt was so upset because Nicholas's pogroms pushed so many Jews to migrate to the United States, it was becoming a migration issue. Oh, and the Tsar was also just not good at czaring. He lost a war to Japan. The Meiji Restoration was real. He killed his own peaceful protesters. He took on the creepiest spiritual advisor in history. And then, World War I, peaceful protesters. He took on the creepiest spiritual advisor in history. And then World War I was a disaster for Russia. They had more deaths than Britain, France, and the US combined. The people had enough and protests broke out in Petrograd on International Women's combined. The people had enough and protests broke out in Petrograd on International Women's Day, March 8th.
Every year, Old Spice rescue crews save millions of innocent dudelings from flat, dry, and dull-looking hair.
The Great War. The war to end all wars. The Civil War of the West. World War I. Okay, this is the big one. It gets 2 sections. Let's go. Today, we review the causes of World War I. I'm going to use a very common acronym here that your teacher may have used to walk you through the causes and the background to World War I. So let's talk about the 4 main reasons for World War I. First, militarism. Since we last saw a major war between the industrialized powers of the West, militaries have grown exponentially. Let's compare 1815 to 1915. That's Napoleon versus World War I. Napoleon could shoot a bowling ball at you from 2,000 yards, and he'd probably hit you. World War I generals could shoot a Volkswagen at you from miles away, and they'd probably hit you too. The Germans built this gun just to bombard Paris. It fired into the stratosphere. It could hit you from 81 miles away. Google around and find a city that's 81 miles from you. Yeah, the Paris gun could hit you from there. These militaries were massive. Take a look at Napoleon's flagship. Okay, now look at the USS Texas that was built in 1912. See what I'm saying? I could go on. Okay, now look at the USS Texas that was built in 1912. See what I'm saying? I could go on, but just know the next main reason for World War I is alliances. This is simple. The old country versus country is over. You fight one country, you gotta take on their whole crew. You wanna fight the Austro-Hungarian Empire? That means you're fighting the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germany, and theoretically Italy. So any conflict that might break out meant that multiple countries were guaranteed to be involved. Here are the big ones. The Triple Entente was Russia, France, and Britain. Russia allied with France in 1894. France allied with Britain in 1904. Britain allied with Russia in 1907. They assembled as the Triple Entente. Entente just means alliance. The other side was the Triple Alliance. This one dates back to 1882. Sure thought so. Okay, so when it comes to the causes of World War I, remember the 4 main reasons: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. But where's this thing gonna start? Let's ask the political goat of Europe, Otto von Bismarck. Europe today is a powder keg, and the leaders are like men smoking in an arsenal. A single spark will set off an explosion that will consume us all. I cannot tell you when that explosion will occur, but I can tell you where. Some damn foolish thing in the Balkans will set it off. He said that the year he died, in 1898, 16 years before the start of World War I. And he was right. So, what does he mean by some damned foolish thing in the Balkans? I'll see you tomorrow. You studied wars in other classes before. You've studied wars in this class already, but nothing like the First World War. This is a total war. Total wars aren't just about the military. In a total war, everything is a legitimate target. Countries will use the totality of their resources. Governments will mobilize everything. The first and only priority is the war. Everything else is secondary. And that brings us to our problem today. This is such a massive event. And not only that, it takes place in roughly the same amount of time it's going to take you to go to high school. So to keep us on track, I'm going by the book today. Today, we review the parts of the Great War that the College Board explicitly expects you to know about World War I. Nothing more, nothing less. So today, I'm going to go sentence by sentence to make sure I don't get off the script. And the first sentence we already talked about in the intro. World War I was the first total war. Alright, so we covered that. So what's next? Governments used a variety of strategies, including political propaganda, art, media, and intensified forms of nationalism to mobilize populations, both in the home countries and the colonies, for the purpose of waging war. And we alluded to some of this yesterday when we were talking about the causes of World War I. But since they mentioned propaganda and art, let's focus in on some actual propaganda posters from the time. This first one is American. The old man is seeing his son off to war, but as he goes, he reminds his dad to do his part and buy war bonds. You'll sometimes see similar posters encouraging people to ration this or that for the war effort. The whole point in a total war is to mobilize everyone. Maybe not for fighting, but for buying war bonds to help pay for the war effort, or grow their own food so more supplies can go to the front, or rationing metal or flour. Australia is, of course, one of Britain's colonies, part of the Commonwealth of Nations. This one is calling out a common theme in propaganda. If you don't go fight them there, you'll have to fight them here. And Germany did have several Pacific colonies around Australia, so it's not completely insane that this could happen. Okay, last one, another British one. This is another call to your emotions. Don't let a wife or a family hold you back. Even the cult of domesticity says that the men should go fight for their country. Alright, so if you remember our discussion yesterday of the main reasons for World War I, focus heavily here on the nationalism side, and the way the governments of these countries prepared their people for war. Alright, let's see what else is mandatory for World War I. New military technology led to increased levels of wartime casualties. We went over this one a bit as well in the causes of war and those main causes for militarism. But since they don't mention much for World War I, let's double down here on the military technologies that could drastically increase the levels of wartime.
Your child needs these three key factors to get into an Ivy League or top 25.
With the Great War behind us, we're surely in for great days ahead. First off, it's called the Interwar period, so there's going to be a Second World War later this week. Second off, 1919 to 1939 is a terrible time. We'll see way more of this tomorrow. But this section is all about how the governments of the world responded to the greatest economic depression of all time. Today, let's review the interwar economy. Ugh, the Great Depression was the worst. I feel like I keep saying that. We should change the name of Unit 7 from Unit 7 Global Conflicts to Unit 7 The Worst. But the interwar period started off pretty sweet for the old United States of America. World War I wasn't fought on our soil. Ain't no trenches over here. Our economy really wasn't hurt by the war. Our production capabilities were unharmed. Our infrastructure was intact. Of all the nations in World War I, we had the 14th highest death toll. Can you even name the other 13 countries who had more people die than us? Right? We came out pretty well. By the way, we were right between number 12, Belgium, and number 14, Portugal, on the list of highest death toll from World War I. US society turned into full consumerism mode. We were producing half of the world's consumer goods. In fact, things were so great by the end of the 1920s that America's first celebrity economist, Irving Fisher, said, "Stock prices have reached a permanently high plateau." He said that in August 1929. So obviously the stock market crashes the next month, and our economic dominance fell to economic disaster and brought everyone down with us. And after the market crash, the next decade after 1929 is really not great for anyone. So the economy is poop. How do you fix it? Well, the governments gave up on any kind of laissez-faire economics and decided to get directly involved in the economy. There are three major visions as to how the world should work in the first half of the contemporary period. Capitalist democracies like the United States, communist oligarchies like the Soviet Union, and fascist dictatorships like in Italy. And the Great Depression gave each of these a stress test to see how they would handle the downturn of the Great Depression. So these three are set to intervene in what had mostly been a laissez-faire system in the last period. Warning, I am not an economist. The first intervener is the New Deal. So the Depression hit in 1929, spending revitalized to fit his goals. He even allowed big businesses to collude and form cartels as long as their interests match the interests of the Italian fascist corporatist state. This economic stuff is kind of tough to grasp, so think of it like this. Fascists like Hitler tried to control society by making everyone the same and getting rid of groups they didn't like. The fascist corporatist economy does this too, just for the economy. Third intervener, the 5-year plan. So Lenin died and Stalin took over. Funny thing about communism, it's not in the global economy. They exist in their own communist bubble. In the same way that Germany was hit twice as hard during the Great Depression, this was due to the hyperinflation they had in the 1920s because they had to literally pay for World War I. While the Soviet Union kind of had a similar problem. Russia was on the winning side of World War I, but Russia lost World War I. Then they had a communist revolution. Then they had a bloody civil war. Then Stalin took over. Things really haven't been great for Russia in a long time. I mean, literally since Catherine, I guess. Enter Stalin's 5-year plans. Every 5 years, from 1928 to 1991, the USSR set lofty goals to increase agriculture or industrial growth. And they worked. They did improve the economy. But remember, they were coming off a decade of total war. The ultimate test of the 5-year plan.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And you know who said that?
The interwar period is tough. 1919 to 1939 is a period with not a lot of optimism. Of course, the College Board mentions like 3 things that happen. That's weak. Content's weak, College Board. The interwar period really gets overlooked in AP World History. But I did a little research and I found 13 unanswered questions from the interwar period that I think give you a better idea as to what's going on worldwide. Today, we review the unresolved tensions after World War I. Alright, let's go rapid fire. 13 unanswered questions from around the globe that leave the world in a precarious state. We'll go west to east. Number 1, what will become of Mexico after the death of Madero and the infighting that follows? We know they get a constitution and a stable government, but it was pretty much touch and go there for a minute. Number 2, what will become of Earth's greatest economy when the Great Depression devastates the United States? We obviously know it will be back.
Studying.
Back and be the #1 economy on Earth again. But in the 19th, as anti-colonial sentiment rises up against the French, everything they big to West Africa.
Nazi Germany.
As anti-colonial sentiment rises up against the French. Now this is a big chunk of Unit 8, but during the interwar period, those great empires we covered are starting to lose everything they stole back in Unit 6. Number 4. Speaking of empires,
Causes of World War II.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And you know who said that?
World War I was such a piece of the biggest deal. World War II. I'm gonna keep it A7. Let's go to when it comes to the peace actions on Germany, forced Germany to take the full blame of the war and the dismantling of empires and redistributing of those lands to the British and the French. But even more noticeable is the bunny. The bunny represents the League of Nations. This was Woodrow Wilson's idea that to stop future wars, we need some sort of global body to air grievances or act together against rogue states. And although it was America's idea, we never joined. And the League has no way to back up any of their decrees. Also, this is the group that set up the mandate, so that's another thing they being a race. No, they do not. This bunny comes from how this is gonna end. And the rest, I think you know how this is
International.
gonna end. And the rest of the map is dedicated to aggressive militarism. Fascists in Spain, Germany, and Italy took control and slowly expanded their territories. Germany in Central Europe, Italy into Ethiopia and Greece, Spain coming to power in the Civil War. And it's not just the fascists. Stalin is expanding into Eastern Europe, and Japan's Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere's circumference just keeps growing. The start of World War I is easy, a reverse drive-by on the Archduke. World War II is simple too, but the timing's a little weird. Your teacher probably said, Hitler's fascist aggression into Poland led the powers of Europe to step in and confront him on the battlefields of World War II. Yes, and that's true, in 1939. But for me, it's 2 years earlier when Japan invades China in the Second Sino-Japanese War. Either way, totalitarian aggression kicks this prosperity sphere's circumference just keeps growing. The start of World War I is easy, a reverse drive-by on the Archduke. World War II is simple too, but the timing's a little weird. Your teacher probably said, Hitler's fascist aggression into Poland led the powers of Europe to step in and confront him on the battlefields of World War II. Yes, and that's true in 1939. But for me, it's 2 years earlier when Japan invades China in the Second Sino-Japanese War. Either way, totalitarian aggression kicks this thing off in the late 1930s, and it won't come to a close until the late summer of 1945. All right, so how do we conduct the largest war of all time? See you tomorrow.
Nice.